In the early 19th century, in the quiet town of Shrewsbury, a young boy named Charles Darwin spent his days wandering the gardens, obsessed with the natural world. His father, the formidable Dr. Robert Darwin, had high expectations for his son. He envisioned Charles following in his footsteps as a successful medical doctor.
At the age of 16, Charles was sent to Edinburgh University, one of the most prestigious medical schools in the world at the time.
However, Charles found the medical lectures incredibly dull. While other students took notes on anatomy, Charles doodled birds and flowers in his journals.
The breaking point came in the operating theater. In those days, surgery was performed without anesthesia, and the scenes were often brutal and bloody.
Witnessing the screams and the pain of a patient during surgery, Charles felt physically ill. He realized he could never be a surgeon.
Instead of attending classes, Charles began spending time with John Edmonstone, a freed slave who taught him the art of taxidermy.
When Dr. Robert Darwin discovered his son was failing his medical studies, he was furious, claiming Charles cared for nothing but shooting and rat-catching.
As a second attempt at a career, Charles was sent to Cambridge to study theology, intending to become a country parson.
But his passion for nature could not be suppressed. He became an obsessed beetle collector, competing with other students to find the rarest species.
It was at Cambridge that he met Professor John Stevens Henslow, a man who would change his life by recognizing his talent for natural science. One day, a letter arrived that would change everything, an invitation to join the HMS Beagle on a voyage around the world.
In December 1831, the HMS Beagle set sail from Plymouth, England, with 22-year-old Charles Darwin aboard as a companion to Captain Robert Fitzroy.
Darwin struggled with severe seasickness for much of the journey, but he spent his time in his cramped cabin reading Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology.
Their first stop was at San Jago in Cape Verde, where Darwin observed white bands of shells high in the volcanic cliffs, confirming Lyell's theories of rising land. Upon reaching Brazil, Darwin was overwhelmed by the lush, chaotic beauty of the tropical rainforest, describing it as a temple of nature.
In Argentina, Darwin unearthed the fossilized remains of giant extinct mammals, realizing they looked like massive versions of the small armadillos living nearby. In Tierra del Fuego, Darwin encountered the indigenous people and was shocked by the vast differences in human lifestyle and culture. While in Chile, Darwin witnessed a massive earthquake that raised the coastline by several feet, proving that the Earth's surface was constantly changing.
In September 1835, the Beagle reached the isolated Galapagos Islands, a volcanic archipelago that would change Darwin's life forever. Darwin noticed that the giant tortoises and mockingbirds differed slightly from one island to another, sparking a revolutionary idea about adaptation.
He collected many small birds, later known as Darwin's finches, though he didn't immediately realize they were all closely related species.
Sailing across the Pacific, Darwin studied coral reefs in the Cocos Islands, developing a brilliant theory on how atolls are formed over sinking volcanoes. After 5 long years, the Beagle returned to England in October 1836. Darwin was no longer just a hobbyist. He was a scientist ready to reshape human knowledge.
September 1835. The HMS Beagle anchors off the Galapagos Islands, a desolate volcanic archipelago that would soon change the course of human history. Darwin steps onto the scorched earth. He expects a wasteland but finds a living laboratory of nature, unlike anything he saw on the South American mainland. He encounters the legendary giant tortoises. He is fascinated to learn that local residents can tell which island a tortoise comes from just by looking at its shell.
He observes the marine iguanas, calling them imps of darkness. He is baffled to see lizards diving into the cold ocean to feed on seaweed.
Darwin becomes a tireless collector, gathering every bird, plant, and insect he can find, filling crates with the biological secrets of the islands.
He notices the mockingbirds are distinct on each island. This tiny detail begins to disturb his long-held belief in the permanence of species.
The finches, with their varied beaks, catch his eye. Some beaks are for cracking seeds, others for sipping nectar, showing perfect adaptation to their environment.
The vice-governor of the islands explains how tortoise shells vary by the moisture of the island. This casual remark plants the seed of evolution in Darwin's mind.
He remembers the massive fossils he found in Argentina. Why do these living island creatures resemble those extinct giants from the continent?
In the privacy of his journal, Darwin begins to write. He suspects that species are not fixed, but are instead mutable and changing over time. After 5 weeks, the Beagle sets sail. Darwin leaves the islands physically, but his mind remains trapped by the mystery of how life transforms.
Surrounded by specimens and sketches, the young scientist realizes he has the pieces of a puzzle that will challenge the entire world's understanding of creation.
Back in England, Darwin began to connect the dots from his 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle. He realized that the birds he once thought were different species were all finches, each adapted to their specific island environment. While reading Thomas Malthus's essay on population, Darwin found the missing piece. The struggle for survival drives evolution.
In 1837, he scribbled the famous words, "I think," above a crude sketch of a tree, illustrating how all life is connected. Darwin feared his dangerous idea would be seen as heresy, causing him years of physical illness and deep anxiety. For 20 years, he kept his theory hidden, refining it in secret while the rest of the world remained unaware. His wife Emma, a devout believer, was his greatest confidant, though he worried his ideas would separate them in the afterlife. To build scientific credibility before going public, Darwin spent 8 years obsessively studying the biology of barnacles. In 1858, his hand was forced when a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace arrived, describing the exact same theory. The theory was finally presented to the Linnaean Society, marking the official birth of modern evolutionary biology.
In November 1859, On the Origin of Species was published. It sold out on its very first day.
The dangerous idea was now public. Humans were no longer the center of the universe, but a part of the grand tree of life. Following his return from the HMS Beagle, Charles Darwin withdrew to the quiet of Down House, seeking a sanctuary far from the bustle of London. For years, a mysterious illness plagued him, forcing Darwin into a life of seclusion and silent contemplation behind closed doors. He established the Sandwalk, his thinking path, where he paced daily to solve the complex riddles of natural selection. Darwin spent 8 long years in near silence studying barnacles, a meticulous task that grounded his radical theories in physical evidence. In the privacy of his study, he began writing a draft that would change history, yet he kept it hidden, fearing the public's reaction. His wife, Emma, was his greatest confidant, though her deep faith created a silent, respectful tension between their two worlds. He broke his silence only through letters to a few trusted friends, famously describing his theory as akin to confessing a murder. The tragic death of his beloved daughter Annie in 1851 deepened his silence and pushed him further away from traditional religious comfort. Even in his darkest times, he looked for answers in his garden, testing how long seeds could survive in seawater to prove island colonization. The Great Silence was finally shattered in 1858 by a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, who had independently discovered the same theory. The sudden realization that his life's work might be eclipsed forced Darwin to overcome his hesitation and prepare for publication. The era of silence was over. Darwin began the feverish work that would soon become On the Origin of Species, changing the world forever. By 1858, Charles Darwin had been working on his theory of evolution for 20 years, meticulously collecting evidence in secret while dreading the public's reaction. One morning, a letter arrived from the Malay archipelago that would shatter Darwin's cautious pace forever. The letter contained an essay by Alfred Russel Wallace, a young naturalist who had independently arrived at the exact same conclusion: natural selection. Darwin was devastated, fearing his life's work would be forgotten and that he would be seen as a mere follower rather than a pioneer. He wrote to his closest friends, Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, confessing that all his originality would be smashed.
Amidst this scientific crisis, tragedy struck the Darwin household when his infant son, Charles Waring, died of scarlet fever. Lyell and Hooker arranged a compromise, a joint presentation of both Darwin's and Wallace's papers at the Linnean Society of London. The presentation caused little immediate stir, but it spurred Darwin into a frantic 13-month sprint to complete his abstract, the book that would become his masterpiece.
His health deteriorated under the stress, suffering from chronic stomach pains and nausea as he raced against time and rivals.
Finally, in 1859, the manuscript for On the Origin of Species was complete, a revolutionary work that condensed decades of thought into one volume.
On November 24, 1859, the book was published. All 1,250 copies of the first printing sold out to bookstores on the very first day.
The race was over, but the firestorm had just begun. Darwin had changed the world, moving from a life of secret observation to the center of a global revolution. On November 24, 1859, the scientific world changed forever with the publication of On the Origin of Species. The first edition sold out almost instantly.
Darwin's theory of natural selection was a bombshell, challenging centuries of traditional beliefs about the fixed nature of life.
A little-known secret is that Darwin suffered from chronic, mysterious health issues for most of his life, often working in extreme physical pain.
He famously conceptualized the Tree of Life, a revolutionary map showing how every living creature on Earth is connected through a common ancestor.
Despite the public controversy, Darwin remained a recluse, preferring the quiet solitude of his study and the company of his family over public fame.
Darwin's work didn't just explain the past, it became the cornerstone of modern medicine, helping us understand how viruses and bacteria evolve.
He was a prolific letter writer, maintaining a global network of over 2,000 correspondents to gather data for his theories.
One of his final great curiosities was the humble earthworm. He spent years proving their vital role in shaping the very soil we walk on.
Darwin's legacy is a double-edged sword. While it brought enlightenment, he deeply feared how his theories might be misinterpreted or misused.
He transformed biology from a collection of facts into a unified science, giving us the tools to protect biodiversity today. In the end, the man who was once destined for the clergy became the most influential naturalist in human history.
Charles Darwin taught us that we are not separate from nature, but an intricate, beautiful part of its endless, evolving story.